So, several weeks ago, I had a brief tete-a-tete on Twitter with a rather unpleasant young woman who posited that Elizabeth Warren was attempting to split the progressive vote to the detriment of Bernie Sanders. Although I already supported Bernie over Warren somewhat, I took exception to the claim, pointing out that it's in the nature of political candidates to run on their own ideas, right? From there, the discussion quickly degenerated into a snarky back and forth over what constituted a legitimate idea. Initially, this anti-Warren phenomenon among the progressives made me more pro-Warren. Originally, not knowing much about Warren, I had subscribed to the broad common view that Warren was virtually the same person as Bernie, right? I held on to my Bernie boy conviction mainly out of loyalty. I don't like change, I'm very OCD that way, and a general preference for the furthest left candidate in the playing field. I don't necessarily consider myself a socialist, but I admire democratic socialism, and I think, social democracy is, a very good idea, but it's too contradictory for me, either be a socialist or don't, you know what I mean? Yeah. So I continue to admire Warren and her agenda. However, as the last few weeks have gone by, I find myself growing concerned over her flip-flopping, for one thing, with regard to Medicare, which bears an uncomfortable resemblance to Mitt Romney's behavior in 2012. Remember that? Yeah. Nor do I find her anti-billionaire platform particularly convincing. I mean, sure, a New York Times op-ed says that, her tax program would drastically reduce the number of billionaires in the United States and make it harder to hand down multi-billion-dollar fortunes. However, for one thing, we all know a plan like that is never going to get through Congress, right? So, that's all well and good, but it seems to me not to be too cynical about it, but might that not explain why 35 billionaires have already endorsed Warren? Seems a little suspicious to me. And as for Warren's endorsement of the Green New Deal, well, that's very much a point in her favor, but Bernie and AOC are much more important driving forces behind it. I'm not an expert on climate change, but I can't help leaning at least a little more towards whatever candidate wants to invest the most capital in the cause. And that is Bernie, far and away. My own state governor, Jay Inslee of Washington, credited with raising concern for the environment among the 2020 Democratic candidates, had a proposal more like Warren's, but that does not reassure me. We're standing on the brink of irreversible ecological catastrophe, and not to sound too radical, but the more we do about it, the better. I don't care how controversial it may be in the short term. I don't usually like to say things like that. I believe very strongly in, reason, in pluralism, taking all viewpoints into account, not trying to push anything too far, but when we're talking about global catastrophe, how far is too far? You know what I mean? So all that being said, I remain committed to pragmatism and bipartisanship as ever, and I certainly do not approve of hateful anti-Warren statements by Bernie supporters or anyone else. The Bernie bullies did more harm than good back in 2016, and they're doing more harm than good now, and that's always going to be the case. That attitude is not helpful, and not helpful for anyone in any sense. We need to be able to discuss ideas rationally and clear-headedly. That's how you convince people. You can't bully them into better views. I support Bernie in no small part because the man himself strikes me as a living, breathing example of human decency and compromise. You don't get to be the most successful, powerful, far-left politician in the United States, particularly in a country like the United States, without knowing how to find common ground across the political spectrum, knowing how to talk to conservatives and liberals and moderates and everyone in between. So Bernie supporters need to take a cue from their candidate and learn how to communicate with their ideological rivals. Warren needs to get over herself either by making up her mind where she stands on the issues or being the bigger person and getting behind Bernie. Thank you.